Chapter 1, Railroad Accounting Principles. Volume 1. This chapter contains 8 railroad accounting principles established by the Railroad Accounting Principle Board. It divides principles into two categories, general and specific. The general principles in order to considerization are casualty, homogeneity, practical, and data integrity. The specific principles are etany, cost of capital, assets, valuation, related expenses, and productivity. The application of general specific principles to regulatory determinations considered by the Railroad Accounting Principle Board are illustrated in Figure 1. However, all specific regulatory costs applications identified may be described in the discussion to each of the principles, such as the principles may not have a significant or discern effect of the application being considered. This is figure 1. I'm going to back out of it into 75%. You see the internship of the Railroad Accounting Principles regulatory application, general purpose principles. Once again, are casualty, homogeneity, and practically in data integrity, and then it moves on to specific principles on its on the right hand lead. The etany, cost of capital, asset valuation, related expenses, and productivity, and then following it on both general and specific lead into the regulatory applications of the general purpose costing system, which are revenue adequacy, competitive access, maximum rate, abandonment surcharge, minimum rate, long canon, railroad cost adjustment factors, and general purpose costing. Now back once again into 100%, and the principles are interrelated. Interrelationship should be considered in certain instances. Applying principle individually could lead to contradictory results. For each principle, discussion contains a statement of the principle, brief explanation of the principle, a description linking the principle as various regulatory applications to which it may apply. Casualty. A statement of principle. Cost shall only be attributed to the cost objective when a causal relationship exists. The cost would have not been incurred but as from requirements to the cost objective. The cost objective is the result of the use of the resources it contains. Many of the forms depending on the purpose of which the cost information is needed. Existing causal relationships may be established through direct observation, engineering analysis, or statistical techniques. For each regulatory application, the cost must represent the time, orientation, relevation, practical, particular application. This time, the orientation may represent a past, future, short run, intermediate run, or long run. The explanation for the casualty principle states that the attributed costs are the costs which that were caused were a result of the productive activities undertaken. One significant impact or differentiation of the specific regulatory applications is time orientation, past, future, short run, intermediate run, or long run. The casualty principle is used to identify the cost required for the activity is the subject for each of the regulatory application. The application of revenue adequacy, the current Interstate Commerce Commission policy for revenue adequacy compares the return of the investment regulatory entity as provided by the entity principle, which returns the investment available for the financial markets for the same time period. The nominal cost of the capital rate must correspond to the same time period of which the return investment for the entity is measured. The maximum rate when the standalone costing as concept is used the maximum rate. Proceedings cost should be directly attributed to the entity representation of a hypothetical competitor. The time orientation is the period of time the hypothetical competitor would expect to retain its traffic. The competitive access may be granted for verifying periods of time, including the perpetuity of therefore extent cost of factors incremental cost of the railroad granting access to perform services of competing of the railroad over the relevant time period of the appropriate cost. However, the factors may be considered by the Interstate Commerce Commission is in evaluating competitive access issues. The abandonment and surcharge relevant costs that can be avoided by the eliminating a branch line, including the opportunity costs associated with maintaining the service on the line. Information including the cost is used to estimate the comparative cash flow resulting in continuing service with those in discounting the services. Such comparison shall be made for the identical time periods. The minimum rate, long-term factor can in fact, or the relative cost as be used by the avoided by the movements did not take the place. Such costs may be determined by the analyze the time period during the services. It takes the best alternate uses of the assets used in the movement. The general purpose and costing system. Casualty specific costs of the general purpose costing system may be established relying establishes changes in the total cost of the or portions thereof, which occur in the same manner in the changes in the output, such as variability of the normal estimated through the use of the statistical techniques known as the regression analysis. The three critical criteria should be used to establish variability represent relationships through regression analysis. Logical explanation, causal relationship between expenses and outputs, results that are statistically significant. 3. Judgment assessment and experience in interpreting the results of analysis. The relevant time period of the general purpose of cost systems is intermediate, and i.e., one of the recognizing variability of capital costs. Okay, moving on. Homogeneity. Statement of principle. The cost of information organized by the homogeneous cost of pools. The homogeneous cost pools is a group of costs which are governed essentially in the same set of the determinants which are responded to the change in output in the essential identical manner. Some homogeneous cost pools consist of the cost of the interchangeable resources. Resources are considered interchangeable if they are substituted for one another. Without loss of efficiency, in any such case, the cost of the resource shall be assigned to the cost objectives on the basis of the average cost of the interchangeable resources. The explanation. Homogeneity provides guidance on the level of detailed cost information which will require the estimated cost accurately, the specific information necessary for the desired every unit, and be cost furthermore selection of the interchangeable resource further rather than another function which hence does not indicate per causal relationship with output. Application. Maximum rate competitive access. Cost information shall be determined assigned directly to the hypothetical competitor or party seeking access. The abandonment and surcharge of the branch line serves as a cost objective of the cost directly collected. However, because the cost of the moving traffic over the branch may be interchangeable, homogeneous cost of the moving of the railroad track of average variable cost should be used for the off-branch portion of the abandonment of the surcharge cost. General purpose costing and systems. GPCS varies expenses or groups of expenses. For example, an entire entity must be considered interchangeable. As of examples, expenses may include fuel, compensation, labor, function or car ownership maintenance for specific car types. Practicality. Statement of principle. Cost of related information shall be feasible, obtain efficient, determined material and amount to be feasible information may be physical, made possible to obtain an acceptable level of accuracy. To be efficient, determined information must generate benefits that exceed the cost of the providing it. The material amount the information must have such bearing on the issue of the hand that its absence would lead to significant different income. Explanation. Particular principle and provides limited flexibility to applying the railroad accounting principles so that it is improved by the Interstate Commerce Commission. A less expensive method estimated cost when the result of it is not significant different than would have been achieved by the strict conformance within the principles. The application of revenue adequacy. Revenue adequacy requires that may be satisfied with the use of the condensed supplemental schedules rather than through the requirement of the full consolidated reporting. Despite of the theoretical attractiveness of using the current marketing and the value assets real cost of capital rate, the use of the historical cost of the assets normal cost capital rate of the more particular because of the difficulties accurately measuring and removing an information component from the nominal cost of the capital rate, using the great amount of judgment required in implementation of the process, which historical cost of the assets and the entire railroad entity is reinstated. The entity principle requires segregation, separated reporting, related in activities, non-related related activities, affiliated railroads and the railroad related affiliates. However, when it is impracticable to segregate information about the railroad-related activities for the information about the non-railroad-related activities, the affiliate should be excluded in total of the basis whether the affiliate is not predominantly railroad-related. Abandonment and surcharge. For practical consideration, information costs and information the cash flow of may be limited to single years estimated with the effect of the cost increase avoidance occurring uniform over the time. When the cost is estimated charges significantly subsequent time periods, a method must be selected to recognize the time value of the money, such as discounted cash flow approach. All other applications, general purpose costing may be used to estimate the certain costs such as off-branch costing, certain components of the cost such as locomotive repairs, administrative overhead costs, if the cost is not materially different from those that could have been obtained for the detailed and specific studies. Because general purpose costs related to the intermediate run, but they may be used various regulatory applications elements. General purpose costs may be used in estimating other long run and short run costs. General purpose costing system. Since the purpose of the general purpose costing is used and limited to considering accounting costs, considering additional costs and more detailed reporting may outweigh the benefit, increasing accuracy. Therefore, periodically, not annually, review may be required to determine whether the additional detail is needed. The present quantity and diversity of Class 1 railroad reporting the Interstate Commerce Commission appears to provide adequate data that's the general purpose of the cost. Therefore, additional reporting, such as graphic costs of the pools, more frequent reporting reporting and does not appear to be justified at the time. Additional reporting requirements may become justified, however, the number of the reporting railroads decreased to such an extent that the level of statistic confidence and unacceptable cost of gathering such as information ceases. Substantial regulatory use of the general purpose of the costing increase. Data integrity. Statement of principle. Cost-related information should be valid, accurate, and verifiable. To be valid, information must be represent the purpose of the represent. To be accurate information, but must be free from significant error, conform to the applicable standards. To be verifiable, historic information must be supported by the underlying source. Records judgment information must be included for the factors supporting the judgment. Explanation. Data integrity principle may require the information regulatory reported by the Interstate Commerce Commission shall be reviewed to ensure to verifiable accuracy validation. Information submitted by the adversely proceedings before the Interstate Commerce Commission may be analyzed with the party using the discovery rebuttal procedures to determine the accuracy, validity, determination, accuracy, specific standards such as the Interstate Commerce Commission regulations may apply. The application of in data integrity, the revenue adequacy, the Interstate Commerce Commission requires the independent public accountant submit a report filed as in the part of the railroad annual report form, which is the R1, to ensure the regulatory for the information reported in the Interstate Commerce Committee. The independent public accountant should comply with the statements auditing standards of the SAS, number 35, American Institute Certified Public Accountants, AICPA, statements on standards attestations, engagement, and other successor pronouncement regarding reports prepared by the agreed upon procedures. All other applicants, general assets, in general, to assist the verification of each proceeding, the data presented must disclose all key consumption methodologies, allocations used to support them, explain the relevance of the data assumption used in the issued, identify the data source used. The general purpose of the costing system is which the revenue adequacy of the Interstate Commerce Commission requires the independent public accountant submit the report filed as part of the annual R1 to ensure the integrity of the key financial operating information reported to the Interstate Commerce Commission. The account should comply with the SAS number 35 and the AICPA statement of the standards attestation engagements. The successor pronouncements regarding the reports prepared using agreed upon procedures. The ETNI statement of principle. The railroad of the ETNI shall compromise the activities affiliated with the railroad affiliates. The affiliation is defined and in conformance with the generally accepted accounting principles of the railroad. ETNI shall measure the reported information railroad-related activities conformance with the general accepted accounting principles unless otherwise provided by the specific railroad accounting principles. Railroad-related activities are these provided in support of railroad operations. When non-related railroad-related activities are included in the ETNI, they shall be segregated for the information reported separately. Any related transaction between the railroad ETNI and other, including affiliates that are not related to any other reclassification railroad-related or non-railroad-related status within the ETNI should be recorded for the fair market value at the time of the transaction. Reclassification railroad-related gain or loss should be recognized at the same time. The explanation of the railroad explanation of the ETNI. The principle provides the framework of the determination activities related to the transaction to which the railroad accounting principles apply. The railroad purposes, therefore, and ETNI principles only require information about the railroad-related activities. Although the railroad ETNI may be provided with additional information, the determination of how to include the railroad-related activities may be in accordance with the data integrity of practical principles. Certain non-railroad activities may be included in the ETNI data integrity reason. The non-related, non-operating activities of the railroad may be segregated as reported using the procedure for the such as used prescribed by the Interstate Commerce Commission. It is practicable to segregate and railroad related from the non-railroad related to of an affiliate. The affiliated should be either included or excluded of the basis whether it is predominantly related or related not. The affiliated is in any party, including the subsidiaries, the directly indirect through one or more intermediate controls controlled under the common control of the railroad is predominantly the railroad related. If it could not continue to exist, but the revenue derived from the support provided by the railroad operations. The principle is not intended as a vehicle for increased assets, values, repetitive transaction between the related parties. Recognition of the gain of the reclassification does not invalidate the general accounting assess principles, so long as the gain the intercompany transaction eliminated from the consolidated statements of the government accounting assessment principles reporting for the ETNI. The Railroad Accounting Principle Board believes that the requirements necessary to measure accurately the economic effects that could have been achieved with the railroad-related activities, including the ETNI, to conform with the casualty homogeneity principles of ETNIs and specific regulatory purposes are smaller than the railroad ETNI as a whole. The application. Revenue adequacy. The application. The ETNI determination of the revenue adequacy for the railroad enterprise is a whole combination of activities affiliated with the railroads, their railroad-related affiliates. To measure the revenue adequacy of the railroad entity, the financial reporting must identify both the assets of the railroad-related activities, revenues, expenses, the results of their use. The reporting requirement can be met with the filing of the condensed combined balance sheets, condensed statements, operations. This not includes the additional detailed statistics, other information, including R1. To portray the accurate economic effect of the railroad and entity, transaction-related parties outside the railroad entity should be fair market value. The resulting gains and losses should be included with the measurement of the return of the investment of the revenue adequacy purposes. The maximum rate. When standalone is the cost of the maximum rate preceding the entity and compromises activity associated with the transaction network required for the hypothetical new competitor to serve its designated customers' competitive access application. The increment of competitive access cost the entity compromises activities and facilities of one of the railroad or which as another railroad is seeking use. The abandonment, the entity compromises the activity associated with the trackage-related assets herein referred to as a branch line, for which the abandonment of the surcharge is sought as the part of the railroad entity effective with the activities. The general purpose of the costing systems is for the entity compromises the activities associated with the homogeneous railroad operations under current circumstances. Practical principles permits as a railroad to continue using existing reporting entities. Cost of capital, statement of the principle. The cost of capital should be a weighted average computed using the proportions of the debt and the equity is determined for the market values of the current market rates. The current market rate shall be nominal rate of the return required for the investors of the railroad enterprises in the relevant period. A nominational rate includes the effect of inflation. Explanation. The cost of the capital is annual percentage rate that represents the return of the specific the cost of the capital is annual percentage that represents the return of the required to attract the retentional capital amounts adequate to provide with the sound transportation system in the United States. The cost of capital should be industrial wide rate of the individual depending on the specific regulatory application determined in accordance with the casualty Practicality principles. The application, the revenue adequacy nominal industry-wide cost of capital rate generally is appropriate to determine revenue adequacy of an individual railroad entity's maximum rate. The nominal cost of capital rate should reflect the risk of the hypothetical competitor. The rates may be either individual cost capital relevant to the hypothetical competitor for the practical reasons for the industrial rate of the railroads. The competitive access nominal cost of the cost capital rate may be either industrial-wide for the rate of the railroads for the individual cost of the capital rate of the incumbent entity. The abandonment and surcharge and nominal cost of the capital rate in either industrial-wide or individual should be used to estimate the railroad opportunity cost. Of the capital opportunity cost represents the return of the good that have been earned in a branch line that have been liquidated and proceeds and reinvested in other activity chosen by the railroad. Because of the current nominal rate is used in conjunction with the current market value assessed based on the year-to-year changes in the market value branch line assessed should be included as capital gains and losses and the earnings generated by the continuing operations. The general purpose of the costing system, when the nominal cost of the capital rate is appropriated, determining the general purpose cost of the Interstate Commerce Act, specifically embedded with the cost of the debt, is in certain situations where the GPCS may be used. Therefore, legislation needs to permit the economically most accurate nominal cost capital rate for this situation. Assets, valuation, and related expenses. The assets should be valued at either the value of the resources foregone by the entity acquired by the assets, the GAAP cost, or at the current market level, depending on the regulatory application's method of value assets, and each of the applications shall be determined by the casualty principle. The GAAP cost responsibly and not be reviewed as a meaningful regulatory measure of the value. Other measures of the value may be used. The explanation for the assets and valuation and related expenses. resources obtained by the sacrificing other resources. This sacrifice represents a measure of the entity's cost to be used in determination not net investment base and the corresponding expenses each of the regulatory application consistent with the casualty principle of the time orientation past and future for the measuring of the asset will differ from the different application consistently with the practical principle of less accurate estimates to assess the valuation and be acceptable. Other measures of the value may be used to other convert situations to which the GAAP cost is not meaningful regulatory measures of the value, such as inappropriate values results of disposition acquisition of the assets through the structuring of the transaction. Application revenue adequacy. The GAAP cost should be used to report assets, value, and related expenses. Determination revenue adequacy. However, the alternative measure of the value of the predecessor cost of the or a modification may be used in the Interstate Commerce Commission. Determination of the GAAP cost does not produce meaningful regulatory results in certain situations. Other measures may be appropriate for the GAAP cost, either depressed or overvalued for the underlying economic value as a result of government action and regulatory policy. For each of the railroad entity, the net investment at the base of the computing return investment is the net investment railroad relation. Assets. Less is related to deferred tax credit balance. The reduction recognizes deferred tax credits represents the capital provided by the zero cost real net investment base and serves the denominator computing the return of the investment earned by the debt holders and the shareholders. The Railroad Accounting Principal Board conducted the depreciation accounting is more than economical accurate retainment of the replacement betterment accounting. The received comments, questions, and implementations issue the fairness of the permitting existing recognized twice for regulatory purposes. The Interstate Commerce Commission should be in the review of the question which the public participation by all interested parties determining the appropriateness of the approach of the alternative. The maximum rate, if standalone, is used in the asset valuation, should be current market value, excluding the special entry and exit barrier costs. At the time of entry, hypothetical law, new competitors, standalone cost of hypothetical competitor generally should be measured projected annual after taxes cash flow that discounted on the nominal cost of the capital rate equals the asset of the value at the time. The depreciation deferred in the tax non-cash expenses therefore would not be deducted for the gross cash recipients of the annual cash flow computation. Competitive access. For competitive access, the asset valuation should be the current competitive marketplace with the incremental assets required of the providing the joint use of the services with the incumbent railroad. The abandonment and surcharge. Because the relevant cost, the opportunity cost of the asset cost should be determined using the current market value. However, under the practical principle, the excess of the corresponding expenses not specifically identifiable with the line segment subject to the abandonment or surcharge may be valued at acquisition cost less accumulated depreciation. Minimum rate and long canon factor. Assessed value opportunity cost, however, under the casualty principle of the movement use of the short run ideal capacity, those assets are valued at zero cost. The general purpose costing system. Annual assets should be determined using depreciation account of the general purpose of the costing system. The GAAP, for the reason the practicality, however, many of the more meaningful measures of value may be preferred to use in specific regulatory purposes. Productivity. Statement of the principle. To measure the cost of the charge accurately indices use of the railroad regulatory purposes should incorporate changes in the productivity as well as changes in the input principles. Explanation. The total change in the cost of the one period to another occurs during one changes in output of the base level output change. 2. It changes the price of the goods services used to produce the output of the input price. And 3. The change of the consumption of the goods services required to produce each unit of the output. Productivity changes computed by the dividing of the change of the measuring the output of the one period to another and accompanying change in the input and should be measured on long-term trend in the productivity. Exclusion productivity component is cost indices implicity and measured productivity and changes zero. Inclusion any appropriate productive component leads to the greater economic accuracy. The long-term measuring productivity is zero. The application maximum rate of competitiveness and abandonment surcharges. When indices the change of the cost are used, they should include the appropriate measure of the productive changes. The productivity measures may be either national average or individual measurement. The appropriate measures based on the integrity or the information furnished by the parties proceedings should be decided by the Interstate Commerce Commission. The rail cost adjustment factor. The railroad Accounting Principal Board believes that appropriate productivity adjustment necessary for the railroad cost adjustment factor to measure the cost changes accurately, and the Interstate Commission such an immediately appropriate productivity adjustment of the railroad cost adjustment factor. The general purpose and costing system, when indices the changes in the cost are used, they should include the appropriate measures of the productive changes. The productivity measures should reflect the changes in the productivity individual elements associated with the rail movements closely as practicable. The appropriate measures based on the integrity of the information furnished in the parties in proceedings such as decided the Interstate Commerce Commission. Chapter 2, Effects and Principles and Specific Regulatory Applications of the General Purposes of Costing System.